John Ryan of Certification Europe to give us a rundown on the new regulations that are hitting the large organisations across Europe and how it's trickling down across the client base and how it might impact on your business, as these will be your customers. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Conor. Good afternoon, everybody. Let's see if the presentation is working. The last time I did a presentation at this event, the presentation went faster than I could talk, which is slightly unusual because I'm usually told to slow down when I'm speaking at events like this. So hopefully the time will run. So there's a couple of things I wanted to cover. I suppose Conor put the taster out this morning talking about new regulations and what are the impacts. And I suppose the overall catch-all I had from my presentation was to keep in line with the theme sustainable energy management. And I suppose in Certification Europe our roots are in sustainability. We started out providing the first accredited certification scheme for environmental management in the country back almost 14 years ago. We've I suppose added into the portfolio on that side of the business on energy management systems with the first accreditation scheme for certification to what was IS 393, which is back in 2007. And I suppose this year we've added to our portfolio on sustainable event management, and our office in Italy became the world's first accredited for that product line. So I suppose we've seen the changes happening within our customer base and within the markets in which we operate around the general themes of sustainability over that period. I suppose the primary focus that I had initially in my presentation was to talk about one pillar within the whole sustainability forum, and quite a specific component in there around the area of energy management. And so three things, and maybe I'll focus a little bit differently on one than the other. The changing face, I suppose, of what we see is happening, where energy has now been brought into the boardroom as a business critical issue. Secondly, looking at the uptake of systems within that space, and some very interesting sort of stats now coming out to see what's working in other jurisdictions that we could maybe consider. And then looking at some recent developments, and particularly around the legal or the requirements that organisations are facing from a regulatory point of view in this space, driven by the European context. And I suppose firstly, there's a whole range of different things which influence the energy journey for organisations, whether it's security of supply, whether it's the role of the customer, and we've heard a number of organisations speak today about how as part of supply chains these issues get raised either on the sustainability pillar or on direct cost reduction. Secondly, in relation to the deployment of formal business models, and I suppose we've got Barry mentioned just at the end of his presentation the ISO 50001, and that's something I'm going to talk a little bit about. We've certainly seen what I've called the rise of the competent person. What does that mean? Certainly an increase in the amount of pressure on individuals within organisations to have more formal levels of competence to achieve certain outcomes. So, for example, the role of the energy auditor, and in particular I'm thinking about the implications for some of you in relation to the Energy Efficiency Directive and the potential impact there in having to do energy audits and the requirements within the schemes that are being deployed at different European states as to have those people actually registered and recognised formally. And finally, behavioural change. And I was very interested in the presentation from Nestle this morning talking about how to get to the next level of development, and maybe mention one or two things there. So why are we doing all this in the first instance? And I suppose I wanted to put up two graphs which I can't take any credit for, but they show a trend. I think this is the oil price taken from the OPEC's website as of yesterday. Now it is a long trend, but I suppose one of the challenges in energy management programs as part of sustainability is developing back the value to the business. And I suppose you'll see that the overall trend since 2002 that they're showing there is upward, but there's been a bit of a dip over the last couple of years. And we've seen certainly a decoupling now of price-driven activity and the role of energy management. A separate slide here, and this is taken from CMEs, simply shows the variability in that, again with an upward trend. Big drop off at the end there most recently. But I suppose the overall trend that we've seen within our customer base, which would stretch now from Ireland, UK, down into other European countries and in as far as the Far East, has been an overall increase in the pressures on organisations to be more efficient, either driven from a pricing point of view or from a customer demand point of view or a simple business-centric point of view. Within that, we've seen then organisations take the approach of adopting formalised systems to help them achieve that. And the formalised systems I'm talking about, I suppose, are those typically in relation to ISO 50001. And so this slide hopefully will give you an indication to show you, and again this data is taken from the ISO survey, Okay, we've picked that, I suppose, as the definitive guide in this point, simply because it's consistently applying the same model in terms of capturing of data. And again, we're seeing on the rightmost column on that ISO 50001 a big increase in the uptake through the survey from their 2013 data, up by 116%, but still very low entry level compared to, I suppose, the most well-known ISO number 9001, okay, so which is still rolling well beyond the million mark for organizations. So while business systems are developing and moving over time, there still is a lag in terms of the deployment of 50001, for example, as a business tool as compared to ISO 9001. And that's a very interesting debate, and within our own network internationally, that debate rages as to why that is. And I suppose we all maybe have separate views on it, but it seems unusual that a management system standard that's built on verification of performance and saving, that is ISO 50001, hasn't actually exploded in the way that some of the other management systems have. I will acknowledge that I suppose it's only published in 2011, which is pretty new for a management system standard. Interestingly, and I suppose, across the EU, a very interesting profile. And again, same data set taken from the ISO survey. So you can see on the left-hand column there a marked differential between Germany as a European state and the rest of the economy, if you like. So I suppose, why is that the case? Well, I suppose apart from perhaps you could say the fact that they maybe are a little bit more efficient in full stop when it comes to dealing with their manufacturing base, luckily so for us in Ireland. But there are two very specific incentives that organisations take advantage of. Firstly, in relation to exemptions from the feed-in tariffs, which are associated with paying for their renewable energy policy. There's exemptions for organisations who go down this route. And secondly, in terms of the electricity tax in Germany, there's exemptions for organisations. And from 2013, they basically have to prove that they have an energy management system that's certified to meet the requirements of the standard. So I suppose there are policy and economic drivers supporting the uptake across various different member states, and different policies help enact that. But coming back to, I suppose, more fundamentals for businesses, and I suppose for the businesses and the businesses you may represent, there's two big impacts that we see coming down the track, and that we're getting a lot of, I suppose, concern from the industry base that we deal with. And these are coming from, I suppose, the implementation across the member states of the Energy Efficiency Directive. And two things, I suppose, I was just going to flag today based on, I suppose, conversations. It's probably been covered perhaps earlier on this morning that I didn't see. But in the UK, they've launched the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme Regulation. So another acronym in the business. And this is really the UK government's approach to implementing the requirements of the Energy Efficiency Directive, and specifically Article 8 of that directive, and that applies to those organisations that are up there. And what does it mean for those organisations? Well, basically, they have two options. One, you conduct what they describe as a mandatory energy audit every 4 years, and you must, within that, identify cost-effective energy saving measures. There is a limitation on that, in that the UK have decided that only registered, and I'm using that term loosely, registered auditors can perform such audits, and the registration process is conducted by the Environment Agency in the UK, and within that, auditors must demonstrate to meet the requirements of another acronym, PAS 51215, which is a publicly available specification setting the competence requirements for energy auditors, published by the BSI. So the approach they've taken in the UK is that DEC, is the Department of Energy and Climate Change, contracted BSI to write a publicly available specification setting out competence requirements that the Environment Agency will then assess people against before you can go and do what you're required to do from a mandatory point of view. So it's quite a bureaucratic approach. The other option is you use ISO 50001. Full stop. So we're certainly seeing now that the compliance regime is now starting to raise these queries for customers and saying, okay, we have two options here. Which should we go for? What's the best for our business? And I suppose we'd certainly be advocates of the latter approach, which is using a business management system as opposed to a compliance audit effectively. So very quickly, if you're faced with this, I suppose, what are the options? And what I've listed there is the current list that I've taken from the EA's website of who they've approved as schemes for energy auditors. So this isn't going to be done on an individual basis in the UK. They've taken the approach of approving schemes or I suppose the organisations that supply them. So there's about 12 or 13 different ones. I've highlighted the top two because I know that a number of the people attending here today have actually probably gone through this process or indeed are on the route to. So I've mentioned two specific qualifications: Certified Energy Auditor or Certified Energy Manager. They're both the AEE qualifications. Again, coming to the front of my presentations, I meant the role of the competent person. So these are personal certifications that an individual can get, and they and the other 11 odd, and there may be more, schemes have been registered with the Energy Environment Agency, my apologies, in the UK as being deemed competent to conduct audits for the purposes of ESOS compliance. So the reason I mention this, it's a very bureaucratic approach, if you like. There's multi-levels of approval effectively required within there. What's the benefit for the organisation? And I suppose the way I've read this is that the compliance regime pushes you to go, I suppose, two different routes. It goes the requirement to conduct an audit, which you must identify measures. I'm not aware that they've specified you must implement those measures, but I'm open to correction on that. Or secondly, you take the more management system approach, which we've seen that's running very effectively here in Ireland for us. And so that's what I wanted to briefly mention. And I suppose I'm conscious that SEAI, as represented by John O'Sullivan, are going to follow on from me. So they will have, a much more, holistic view perhaps on this. But the way I understand it is that the process by which we're going to adapt in Ireland is slightly more enlightened. In fact, you could say it's fundamentally more enlightened given where we've come from an efficiency point of view, in that ISO 50001 or energy management systems is already the norm for lots of us in the organisations we work within or serve as customers. And in fact, the programmes running through the Energy Agreements Programme and supported by the LIEN programme, it's inherent in those programs that efficiency is being built in there. And I think once again, in Ireland we're ahead of the curve when it comes to maybe our counterparts in the UK. That's not going to solve the problem for yourselves if you're, I suppose, multi-jurisdictional organisation, maybe trying to meet the requirements in both jurisdictions. So within Ireland so far, there's a consultation process that I understand is yet to be finalised in relation to what's going to happen. There is provision for the registration of auditors via SEAI under SI 426, which is published early this year. Energy management systems to improve efficiency has been deployed within the community, if you like, since 2007. And I think it's worth remembering that both the previous versions of the ISO standard that we used here, the EN 16001 model, another number, and the IS 393 were both really orientated around efficiency. 50001 talks about performance, and efficiency can be your performance measure. So it's already the norm for us, so we're a little bit ahead of the curve there, and I think it's going to, I suppose, change perhaps how how companies here will adopt it. The other thing, I suppose, it throws up from that is for organisations are, I suppose, working across multiple jurisdictions, and I suppose this is something that I suppose we're seeing within particularly some of the food sector clients that we would deal with, who would maybe have operations here into the UK and further afield into mainland Europe. How do you come up with one solution where you maybe have different requirements in each jurisdiction? And I suppose the common theme, as enshrined within the directive effectively, is ISO 50001 as a business system model. So our view on where next for business on this, we see that the uptake of that management system is going to continue. It's a business management system at the end of the day, so it's flexible to the needs of any business. And in fact, we're dealing with clients as far-flung functions of business as food and drink, third level, commercial buildings, financial houses, heavy industry across multiple jurisdictions who can all get benefit from it. Why? Because they're verifying the outcomes within it. It's a requirement of the standard in itself. So improvements in the performance that they achieve and set themselves can be verified. It is a compliance route for the directive effectively, or maybe it hasn't been designed that way, but it is. It can be deployed across multi-site locations, which again was a concern for organisations, particularly in the UK markets. And we've got 5 sites. We've got to put this across our organisation. Can it be done? Yes, it can. And I suppose the way we would see it and the benefits we've seen getting from customers, and I didn't put it up this year, but I covered it last year, is it gives more value to a business because you can verify the outcomes and you can tweak it in line with your business needs, as opposed to taking it as a once-off audit of your organisation, which may or may not add value depending on what you do with the outcome of that audit activity. So where next for anybody on the auditor's side of things, I suppose there is a general feeling that, and I use the term regulated, I suppose, in a broadest sense. The process is clear in the UK, as are the criteria I've just alluded. It's not fully yet here, although the requirements and how it's going to be adopted are covered, and the references are on the slide deck there to the legislation. And again, for some of you who are going to be involved in this and decide that you want to go this route, you may need to formalise your competence to achieve any of the registration requirements that will either be adopted here through SI 426, or indeed with those list of 13 or plus 16 odd compliance schemes that are going to be requirements in the UK. And the clock is ticking, obviously, for our organisations. December of 2015 is fast approaching. So that's it for me. I think 18 seconds past my 15 minutes. So with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Well done, John. Thank you very much indeed.